Hello, and welcome to another edition of AppSec Decoded. I'm Taylor Armerding, security advocate with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group, and this is going to be the first of several conversations devoted to decoding threat modeling. And joining me to help with that is Christopher Cummings, principal consultant at Synopsys, who is co-author of a recent white paper on the topic. So Chris, welcome, and thanks to you and your fellow authors for a useful document that's now available for free at synopsys.com. And to start, as the paper points out, while threat modeling can be a lengthy and complicated task, there's general agreement on the 5 necessary steps to create a useful model, and they are scoping, data gathering, system model, attack model, and risk analysis. Don't worry, we're going to be mentioning those again and again. But that doesn't mean every provider does them all the same way. The pattern may be the same, but the methodologies are different. And today, we're going to get into some of the details of how the Synopsys team addresses the first 2 steps, scoping and data gathering. But first, a general question. What is the overall goal of threat modeling? According to your paper, it's to help security teams understand the threats they face and to understand an attacker's mindset, which then helps them address those threats more intentionally and efficiently to provide the most protection to what they value most. But the paper notes that different companies may find different approaches that work for them better. Can you expand on that just a bit?
Thanks, Taylor, and I appreciate you for having me today.
Sure.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before I jump into that, I want to acknowledge the team, Sergio Santos, Lee Zhao, Dan Barban-Glupa, who without this paper wouldn't exist. So really appreciate them and all the effort that they put into the paper along with myself. So digging into the question, there's a couple of things to dissect there. What's the point or what's the goal of threat modeling? That goal is going to change and morph with each organization as they may see it. Some organizations are looking to identify threats. Some organizations are looking to adhere to compliance requirements. Some organizations just want to understand what the security posture of an application or system looks like. And so that's why we talk about the vast majority of threat modeling may differ across the board. So one of the big things there is threat modeling is not a one-size-fits-all activity. What we talk about in the paper are 4 primary approaches to threat modeling. You have a software-centric, asset-centric, threat-centric, and attacker-centric. We'll dive into a bit deeper there. What the paper is trying to accomplish is how do we weave in and out of those approaches? How do we present, the audiences with different perspectives of what may be important, right? So we'll talk a little bit about diagramming and how we can understand the software. We'll talk a little bit about attacker personalities and personas and what that provides and produces from a threat model. So at the end of the day, it's understanding that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Everyone's going to approach threat modeling a little bit differently depending on when they do it and how they do it. But yeah, so I think, as you look at it, everyone's going to do it a little bit differently. This process kind of aligns to, how you can weave in and out of those different methods.
Right. All right, well, let's jump into step 1. As the paper puts it, the first question in determining scope, which is topic number 1 or step number 1, what needs to be protected? And, it would seem to me like the obvious answer would be everything in my system, but it's not necessarily that simple. So tell us a bit about establishing scope within what you've called, and I'm quoting here from the paper, the whole tangle of hardware, software, network interfaces, cloud services, legacy systems, etc., that interact together. That's a mouthful.
Yes. So thanks for asking that. I love this question for a couple of reasons. I'm going to break it down into a couple of different areas. The first one, we had a couple of revisions about how to present scoping, because oftentimes scoping is an activity presented from a consultant's mind, right? We're trying to understand how long it's going to take us, but that's not what we're trying to go after here. Is it protected is really understanding about what we're drawing the box around, what boundary is required for us to review the system, the functionality, the feature, depending on what process we're looking at or when we're injecting our threat modeling activity. So it's not, hey, how much this is going to cost, but it's what are the goals and the objectives of the business? What risk are they looking for, and what system or component best exemplifies that risk? So drawing that box around that, what is protected? Because once you go a little bit deeper, we'll talk about later, is you need to then understand, what does that box do, right? When you look at the inside of that box, what are you actually doing? That's one of the most important questions. But before you can get there, you really need to understand what it is the team wants you to assess, what it is that you want to look at from that. And so when you talk about that mouthful, right, it's really to articulate that a single system can be made of a million different parts. Okay. And as a part of threat modeling, you don't necessarily need to look at them all at the same time. So taking the scope and breaking down those parts and possibly doing it in an iterative fashion might allow you to move at the speed of development, right? And so when you look at our process and the things that we've talked about, you can possibly do these in different chunks. Maybe you want to do the attacker-centric part first and then call it done, and then maybe move on to the next one and then add a new feature, a new functionality, or a new application, and then move along that way. So it's really dynamic in that way, and making sure you understand that is important.
All right, step two, second is data gathering. And as you've noted, once the scope has been established, that still leaves a lot of, quote, uncharted territory. How do you search that territory, and how do you deal with any roadblocks or problems in getting the data you need? And then how do you validate it or trust it or know that it's legit?
Yeah, awesome. This is data gathering is, I won't say the most important, but it's the primary vehicle of how we understand, what is actually happening within that system. So we'll talk a little bit more about, identifying the assets and controls a little bit later on, but we collect data or we do this discovery process in three primary factors, or three primary ways. One is through interviews. So we like to talk to the developers, the architects, different engineers to understand those perspectives. And the key thing about the interviewing process, and we pride ourselves in making sure that we're asking open-ended questions, is to identify, and take us down that pathway and identify if there's any consistencies, right? And as you pointed to, validating that information, one of the other sources that we use to collect data is, internet accessible information, white papers, or vendor provided documentations. A big topic that comes up in a lot of these conversations is encryption, right? What does default encryption mean? Everyone's like, oh, we're protected by default, right? So we need to look at the vendor provided documentation to understand what that means. Protected by default might not actually mean encryption that they think it means, right? So that's how we validate it there. And then one of the biggest areas as well is diagrams, right? So providing architectural diagrams, data flow diagrams gives us a really good look into what's actually happening for us to then build our own model that we'll discuss in a bit.
All right, well, that was step one and step two. And thank you, Chris. We are going to leave it there for now.
Awesome, thank you.
But we will be back. So thanks to you, our audience, for joining us. And we hope that you will keep an eye out for our next conversation, which is going to focus on step three, system model, in creating a threat model. And remember, you can download the threat modeling white paper for free at synopsys.com. And until then, I'm Taylor Armerding with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group. We help organizations build trust into their software.